This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis, outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. I'm Gordon Long with GordonTLong.com. As part of our ongoing series on financial repression, I have Dominic Frisby joining us from the UK this morning. Dominic is a professional comedian and financial author of a number of books, such as Life After the State and Bitcoin, The Future of Money. Welcome, Dominic.
Thank you very much, Gordon. A pleasure to be here.
Dominic, this is the first time we've had you on our show. I wonder if we could begin with you giving us some orientation of your background and maybe specifically how you as a comedian got interested in economics and finance.
Yeah, well, I'm 45 years old and I've been a comedian since I was in my mid-20s, and in around about 2005, 2006, I had a bit of money and I was working out what to do with it, and I didn't really like all the processes that you have to go through in order to invest it with a financial advisor. I didn't like all the charges and everything else, and so I decided I was going to manage it myself, and I just started reading about various things and concluded that gold was the place to put my money. And then of course, as soon as you start reading about gold, it's a pretty compelling story, and I was very persuaded by it. And then you start reading things that you want to if you like, reinforce the decisions you make, to confirm your own biases, if you like. And so I became very much a gold bug the more I read, and it's a short leap from kind of being a gold bug to being interested in Austrian economics and sound money and all that kind of things. And you know, for a while, that decision to put the money into gold from about 2005-06 right the way through till 2011, you know, it was a good decision. And because of my background was in the media, as well as investing my own money, this kind of sideline of writing about investments and finance developed, and then it eventually ended up with two books, like you said, Life After the State and then Bitcoin, The Future of Money. So that's kind of how it happened. There's a tinge of regret, I should say, because I became so interested at one stage in kind of money and monetary systems, I almost gave up comedy. I barely wrote a word of comedy for several years. So in a funny kind of way, the financial career has come at the expense of the comedy career, but at the moment they kind of coexist.
I would venture they're a perfect marriage right now.
Well, maybe. I need to write a 1-hour comedy show about finance and economics, and it's been something that's brewing at the back of my mind for a long time. I've never quite been able to nail how to do it, but I guess I need to do it. I've been saying this since about 2008, the global financial crisis, and economic crises never seem to go away. So the need to write this show has never gone away, but I still haven't got round to writing it. But that's one of my projects for 2015, anyway. So
are you still a gold bug?
Well, I preferred it when it was going up at 15 or 20% a year. Mm-hmm. I mean, I like the idea of gold, and I like I'm a bit of an anti-statist at heart. I'm a bit of an anarchist, and I believe in small government and individual responsibility and all those things. And I like the discipline that an independent money system forces on governments, and gold is obviously nature's choice of money. So I like all that side of it, you know, the theoretical side of it, but there's the practical side of it and the reality of the world in which we live, and that is that gold is so far from being a real medium of exchange. It really is just a store of wealth, jewelry, an asset class in itself. And I think, you know, those people that thought gold was going to have a role to play in the monetary system, you know, it looked a lot more promising when gold was going up, but I think now I look back in it and think I must have been a bit deluded to think that. I'm not saying it shouldn't, but I'm just saying the actual chances of it happening, you know, it's not, you need some kind of collapse for it to happen.
and which is always a possibility. And then we panic into these sort of things. Dominic, we're here to talk about financial repression, and I've heard all sorts of world-class people talking about financial repression, in various ways of how they see it and describe it. How do you see it? How would you describe financial repression?
Well, I can only really talk about my own experience here in the UK, but I think pretty much the same thing is happening in the UK that's happening in the US, and that is that my big belief and why I like gold is that money should be independent. And the role of money is obviously, as we all know, it's to be a medium of exchange, a store of wealth, and a unit of account. But it's become a political tool. And I think the mixing of money and politics is very dangerous. But at the moment, we have central banks that set interest rates, for example, and the data that they use to set interest rates, in other words, their measures of inflation, are extremely flawed. In fact, in the course of governments and central banks taking control of the monetary system, the word inflation, the meaning of the word inflation, has become corrupted, as has the meaning of the word capitalism and the meaning of the word socialism. All these things that had very clear meanings, they've been corrupted by, well, socialism has been corrupted by left-wing governments who no longer wanted to be labelled socialist. Capitalism has been corrupted by right-wing governments that weren't as free market as they made out they were. And so all these words have been corrupted, and money itself has been corrupted. I just think it's not a fair society when one body, i.e. the government and the central banks, I say one body, it's two bodies, and banks, private banks, have this monopoly, or more correctly a duopoly, on the creation of money. And it just means that those two sectors, the financial sector and the state, just have disproportionate power and influence within our society, and in my opinion they've grown to disproportionate size. So I come back to this point that money should be independent, but at the moment it isn't. Central banks set interest rates, and there are all sorts of other means of manipulation that go on, quantitative easing, and they mean that they've resulted, in my opinion, that money has been distorted, and certain asset classes have, there's too much debt in the system, there's too much false money, so certain asset classes are more expensive than they should be. You get this cycle of booms and busts. People's behaviour is altered by because in setting interest rates, the central bank is setting the price of money. And that has effect on the way people behave, whether they save, whether they spend, whether they invest, whether they speculate. And in my opinion, there's a lot of distortion that's gone on, and people's people, if you can be a bit purist about it, people behave in almost a slightly corrupt way, in a way that I don't think they would behave in a system where money was independent, in a much more purist system. So what do I understand by the word financial repression? It is, I suppose, it is the government manipulation of money in order to achieve a specific goal. The current manipulation of money, the current wave of financial repression, the goal behind that is effectively to bail out the financial system for the excesses that it created in the lead up to 2008, and also to bail out themselves, because governments have spent way more money than they earn, and there is a load of debt that is unpayable, and the way they are paying it back is through what I call manipulation, but what other people call financial repression. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, very, very,
bit of a rambly answer, but anyway, we got there in the end.
Very, very much. Thank you. Where do you see this going, and how do you see this ending? Have you got a sense of that yet?
Yeah, I think it goes on for our lifetime, and probably into my children's lifetime, and until something else happens. When I say that money shouldn't be a political tool, that's, you know, idealistic. Money has always, you know, we go back to the Romans and probably before, everyone was all, you know, medieval kings, everyone was fiddling around with money in some way or other, chipping coins or you know, playing some kind of trick or other. And I just think it's something that leaders do. So the idea that it's going to go away, I mean, I guess, you know, the Roman chipping of coins was another form of financial repression. So I think the idea that, you know, there was this idea, and I believed in it at one stage, particularly when gold was going up, that, you know, there's too much debt, the system can't take it, it's going to implode, and there's going to be some kind of monetary reset, and gold's going to have a role to play. You know, that was something I very firmly believed until a few years ago, and actually, I think they have got away with it, you know, and if you like, the gold bugs have lost. And, you know, I'm just saying that's my opinion. I don't say I agree with it, but that, you know, don't blame the messenger, if you like. And so I think it'll go on in one form or other. There is hope. I've just written a new book about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a fantastic invention. The problem that Bitcoin has at the moment, and the reason that the price is falling, I mean, Bitcoin was the worst asset to own last year. And the reason that the price is falling is that there aren't enough new users. It's not being taken on a practical basis. But so the system's contracting and atrophying rather than growing. But it is nevertheless a fantastic means of making and receiving payment across the internet. And it's a much better form of money, of payment than dollars or pounds. But nevertheless, you know, there are all sorts of other entrepreneurs who are bringing in new payment systems for dollars or pounds, and at the moment they're beating Bitcoin. The technology behind Bitcoin, the blockchain, I think is going to change the way the internet works, but it doesn't happen overnight. It's going to be like a 5-10 year process. This whole new way of proving ownership without the need for a third party to ratify it is incredible, and it has implications for the way we communicate across the internet, the way we prove ownership, the way we send messages, the way we do all sorts of different things. So, you know, there is hope with alternate money systems like Bitcoin, but I wouldn't bet the house on it, put it that way. And so I just think financial repression of one form or another it's a bit like sinning. You know, you can be very religious and say that sinning is bad and wrong and set this goal of a world in which sinning doesn't take place. But, you know, the reality is, the proof of human nature is that sins happen. People sin. And I think, and just a reality that we have to accept is that financial repression will exist as long as we have leaders. And you know, leaders are an essential part of human community, so we're always going to have them. So financial repression in one form or other is going to exist. That said, it is important, and the internet has a huge role to play in this, and people like yourself and perhaps myself as well have a role to play in this. It is important to out and expose financial repression wherever we see it, so that we lessen the effect. Is almost, we're like the regulators, if you like, and the more we expose it, the more transparent money becomes and the less possible financial repression is. But all that'll happen is the more we expose it, the better the financial repressors get at repression, and they'll find all sorts of other elaborate ways to do it. So that's a rather negative message that I feel I'm sending out. I always try and be positive, but I think, I guess, despite that, financial repression is here to stay. So what can you do? Get your own house in order and go out and enjoy yourself.
Well, most of the people that have really studied this and experts conclude and feel strongly that it actually will end not before the central banks and the government haven't done some extraordinary measures and in crises that'll unfold over the next numbers of years. But ultimately, it'll be a currency failure, a failure of fiat currency, a currency collapse, or a readjustment. If we see that crisis, things like cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and then would have the panic into them, which I suspect would drive up volumes kind of in the future, and the movements to gold. But really the state starting to lose control of the currency manipulation. Your book, Life After the...
I mean, just addressing that point, you know, government currencies collapse all the time. We just had the ruble collapse, lose half its value or something against the US dollar. And, you know, so the way to protect yourself against that is to either own foreign currency or own gold or own tangible assets. And, you know, even though gold was flat last year against the US dollar, if you're Russian and you own gold, the purchasing power of your gold pretty much doubled last year. So it was a very good asset to own. But then so would US stocks have been a good asset to own? Or so, you know, maybe it's not as possible for a Russian to own US stocks as it is for them to own gold. I don't know. You know, and so that is the role of gold. It's like your little bit of insurance, if you like. But the possibility of something like the US dollar collapsing is a lot more remote than the possibility of something like, you know, the Russian ruble collapsing. That said, every time you look at the numbers, I mean, to me, the next one that's got to go is something's got to happen in Japan. Because every time you look at the numbers, you just kind of go, how is this possible? But it just goes on and on and on. And you know, if you've been shorting Japanese debt, which must be the obvious trade, you've lost a lot of money. But I mean, at some point, shorting Japanese debt is going to be the trade of a lifetime. But it's also, for the last however long, just been a total widow maker.
Yeah.
So these things just go on, and how do you protect yourself? You just got to use your own method, work out where there's a bull market, and go long. And there hasn't been. I think gold looks pretty good at the moment, actually. But since 2011 to 2014, gold's been a rubbish investment. And so all this talk about gold as a safe haven, it's been the opposite.
Yeah, for in this shorter period of time.
Yeah.
We do a lot of technical analysis, and we're, you know, in a 2-year consolidation that on the long-term technical charts look pretty standard, pretty
maybe
to be expected. Doesn't look like
when
any.
When I make an investment, I make an investment with a 1 to 3 year time horizon. Mm-hmm. And if I bought gold in 2011, and I bought some gold stocks in 2011 or 2010. You know, it looked good for a bit, and now I'm massively underwater with it.
Precisely.
So, you know, what can I do? I can just shrug.
Where I was going here earlier with where this may end and the state losing control, in your book, Life After the State, what was the message in the book there? What did you conclude in writing it?
I concluded that we'd be a lot better off with a lot less government. And even a good third of the book was railing against the monetary system and how awful it is and how much injustice it's created. And I'm a huge believer in independent money, and I believe that if we had money beyond the control and influence of politicians and governments and central banks, wars, for example, would not be possible. Because, for example, the First World War, we came off the gold standard in order to print the money for the war. If we'd all stayed on the gold standard, we could only have spent as much money on that war as we had gold in the vaults, more or less, and the war would have had to have ended by Christmas. And as it turned out, they moved to a fiat currency system, printed money for the next 4 years, and we had the most awful war in history, with over 50 million people losing their lives, if you include the Spanish flu that followed. So I'm a huge believer in independent money. In theory, in practice, maybe I've been beaten up a little bit. I just don't see how it happens in practice without some kind of collapse. And I just think this collapse, I just think it's a bit fantastic. I think it's going to happen. So the theme of the book, so the big theme of the book is money. But I also take a big chunk to argue about all the things that our government provides us with. Health, education, welfare, and I argue that all these things would be much better and much cheaper if the state didn't get involved. The problem with health in the US, UK, health has now become a political tool. Health is an essential human function. It should have healthcare is an essential human need. It has nothing to do with the government. And if the government stayed out of it, I believe, just like food and clothing, which are industries that have benefited from a huge amount of competition, improved productivity, less and less government intervention, the the cost of all these things would fall dramatically. So people would be able to afford much better healthcare for themselves and for their families. Look at something like the aspirin. I mean, aspirins cost about 5p. It costs absolutely nothing to buy an aspirin. It's one of the greatest drugs ever invented. But because of all the protectionism and everything else that gets involved, most drugs aren't, every drug almost should, within a few years after it's been invented, should be as cheap as an aspirin. And they just aren't, and it's crazy. And it's all because of these regulations and patents and all these insurance and all these things that go on. It's just pushed the price up. Same applies to education. Education is a basic human need. Once people have clothed themselves and housed themselves, self-improvement is one of the first things they spend money on. And I know the government provides free education, but somebody pays. We pay through tax. And once we're paying tax for this education that's not very good, we're not in a position where we can actually afford to buy another form of education should we want it. And there are all sorts of issues with the standard government provision of education, all sorts of ideological behaviours creep into the teaching, and that might not be what you want for your children, but because of taxes and the cost of living, you can't necessarily afford anything else. So, and even with healthcare, that's my other welfare, government provision of welfare, the giving of charity is a very, what's the word? It's a capricious process. Different circumstances require different forms of charity. Sometimes, the giving of money is appropriate. Sometimes you actually need to give aid. Sometimes the giver, that's the other thing about the giving of charity, is the giver is never considered. Your taxes are taken and that is it. You're given no choice on how your money is spent and what it is spent on. Whereas the giver needs to be considered in the charitable process. He too has his needs. Compassion is an essential human function. But by taking taxes in this way, the government has almost got itself a monopoly on compassion. And if you don't believe in the government provision of welfare, you're somehow considered incompassionate. And again, welfare needn't be as expensive as it is. And sometimes, the recipient, it's quite humiliating to receive charity. And sometimes, the recipient needs charity. Sometimes that needs to be, what's the word? Private. And other times, a bit of shame it would give the recipient a bit of a backside, a kick up the backside. So there's all sorts of different needs in the welfare giving process that just cannot be met with one size fits all government across the board provision of welfare. It just can't be done. And I just argue that the market in its myriad of different ways, and look at the way the internet, for example, has created all these niche markets and looked after all these niche things in a way that, some kind of state provision just never could. So the big argument is less state, more market. More people, if you like, but just winding up very quick. So that's the message of life after the state. Whether it happens or not is a different matter, but that is the central message. We'd all be a lot better off with a lot less government. Even poor people who are dependent on government for their health and welfare.
Dominic, as we wrap up here, what message would you leave with our listeners who are just beginning this learning process that you began back in 2005 thereabouts, and they're just entering this of starting to suspect there are problems in the system? What would you advise them to do?
I would advise them to question everything, including the dogma that comes out from people like me who already question everything, including the questioners. That would be one thing. And the other thing is, if you're investing your own money, don't confuse your politics with your investments. With your investments, you must be unemotional. You must not let your political opinions, your social opinions, impinge on your investing. the investing is all about protecting and growing your wealth, not about your ideologies. So when you are in investing, find a bull market, find a means, find a little simple technical tool, learn some technical analysis, learn a simple technical tool that tells you when to be in and when to be out of a market, and then use that technical tool unemotionally and be either in or out of a simple investment, and then on the other side of things, question everything, even the questioners. There you go.
Thank you very much. Dominic, can you tell our listeners how they could follow more of what you do, your work, where you entertain, etc.?
Yeah, well, the video that I put on YouTube that everyone liked was called Debt Bomb, so you can start by watching that. That's a bit of fun. My book is Life After the State. My other book is called Bitcoin, The Future of Money. A lot of people say my Bitcoin book is better than my book on Life After the State. I'm not sure. But it's had very good reviews, and it's very readable, and it tells an amazing story, which is the story of Bitcoin. I also have found a way of explaining it that nobody else uses, and I'm the one person in the world that can actually explain it to people who just don't get it. But that's my little secret, that I'm not going to explain how it works. So Bitcoin, The Future of Money, and Life After the State. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Dominic Frisby, or dominicfrisby.com is my website.
Dominic, thank you very much for the time here this morning. All the best in 2015, and I hope your gold investment comes through big time.
So do I.
Talk to you later.
Thanks, Gordon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.